Self-love, the most misunderstood pillar of the human psyche. Self-love is one of the most fundamental pillars of the human psyche, yet also one of the most misunderstood. We live in a society that teaches us from an early age to seek external validation, whether through parental approval, professional recognition, or social acceptance. However, Carl Jung warns us about the dangers of basing our identity solely on how others see us. He invites us to look inward, to dive into the unconscious, and to confront our shadows so that we can build an authentic relationship with ourselves. Jung believed that human beings cannot truly flourish without integrating all aspects of themselves, both light and darkness, virtues and flaws. In other words, self-love is not just about admiring yourself or feeling good. It's about accepting the entirety of who you are. This involves a deep process of self-discovery, where we recognize not only our strengths, but also our fears, insecurities, and repressed desires. Many people confuse self-love with narcissism, but there is a significant difference. While a narcissist obsessively seeks approval from others to sustain a fragile self-image, those who cultivate true self-love do not rely on such validation. On the contrary, they become capable of building healthier relationships because they no longer place the burden of filling an internal void onto others. That's why no one can truly love you until you understand this. When we don't accept ourselves, we tend to lose ourselves in relationships where we seek completion through someone else. We create bonds based on emotional neediness rather than authenticity. The fear of rejection makes us mask who we really are, and this emotional dishonesty prevents any genuine connection. Deep down, others can sense when someone lacks self-love, and even if there is initial attraction, this insecurity eventually leads to jealousy, dependency, and the breakdown of the relationship over time. For Jung, one of the essential steps to achieving self-love is individuation, the journey of becoming who we truly are, free from external expectations. This means shedding social masks, facing our fears, and integrating our shadows. It's not a comfortable process, but it is a liberating one. The moment we embrace our inner truth, we no longer need others to validate us, because we have already found value within ourselves. Beyond psychology, philosophy also reinforces this idea. Nietzsche, for example, spoke about the need to become who you are, emphasizing the importance of living according to one's true essence rather than submitting to social conventions. The Greek philosopher Socrates also taught that self-knowledge is the foundation of a fulfilled life. In other words, all these perspectives point to the same conclusion. Without self-love, we are doomed to search for something outside ourselves that we will never truly find. True love, the kind that doesn't suffocate, demand, or imprison, can only emerge between two people who have already learned to love themselves individually. Otherwise, what we call love is nothing more than an attempt to fill internal voids with another person's presence. The problem is that no relationship can bear that weight for long. So, how can we cultivate genuine self-love? That is the question we will explore next. Cultivating genuine self-love, a lifelong journey. Cultivating genuine self-love is an ongoing process, one that requires awareness, discipline, and the courage to face our own shadows. Jung teaches us that the human psyche is made up of multiple layers, and many of our insecurities stem from repressed parts of ourselves, aspects we've learned to reject because society, our families, or past experiences taught us they were unacceptable. The first step towards self-love, then, is to reclaim these forgotten parts and learn to accept them. This means looking at our flaws without judgment, seeing our insecurities without despair, and understanding that every fragment of our personality exists for a reason. The fear of abandonment, for example, may be rooted in childhood experiences where we felt helpless. The need to please others may come from a deep desire to be accepted. When we recognize these origins, we begin to realize that we are not weak or broken. We are simply human. And humanity, with all its contradictions, is worthy of love. The problem is that most people try to avoid this internal confrontation. We distract ourselves with work, relationships, social media, anything that keeps us from looking inward. But Jung warned, what you resist persists. In other words, the more we ignore our wounds, the more they manifest in destructive ways. Emotional dependency, fear of being alone, the constant need for validation, these are all symptoms of an unresolved relationship with oneself. True self-love begins with radical self-acceptance. This means allowing ourselves to feel, without repression, without guilt. When we welcome our emotions instead of denying them, we start developing a more compassionate relationship with ourselves. Instead of constantly criticizing ourselves, we learn to treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a dear friend. This is a fundamental concept in Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology, which emphasizes that unconditional self-acceptance is the key to a fulfilling life. However, self-acceptance does not mean stagnation. Loving yourself is not an excuse to avoid growth. On the contrary, when we truly accept ourselves, we create a safe internal space to evolve without fear. Personal development stops being a struggle fueled by self-criticism and becomes an act of love. Instead of trying to change because we feel inadequate, we seek growth because we value ourselves and want the best for our lives. Another crucial aspect of self-love is setting healthy boundaries. Too often we allow others to mistreat us because we don't believe we deserve better. We say yes when we want to say no, settle for emotional crumbs, and tolerate situations that harm us. But a person who truly loves themselves is not afraid to stand their ground because they know their worth is not dependent on external approval. The key to transforming your life through self-love is recognizing that it is not a destination, but a journey. It's not about feeling good all the time, it's about being willing to accept and care for yourself, even on the difficult days. And when we learn to love ourselves this way, something incredible happens. Others begin to see us through the same lens. But loving yourself doesn't mean closing yourself off from the world. So how do we balance self-love with healthy connections? Loving yourself without closing yourself off. Loving yourself doesn't mean living in isolation or becoming emotionally unreachable. On the contrary, when we cultivate genuine self-love, we become more capable of building authentic and healthy relationships. The problem is that we often mistake self-love for excessive self-protection. People who have been hurt in past relationships may develop an emotional shield, avoiding deep connections to prevent future pain. But Jung teaches us that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, doesn't happen in isolation. It happens through our interactions with others. Interpersonal relationships function as mirrors. They reflect our unresolved issues, insecurities, and unconscious patterns. If we are unaware of our wounds, we tend to project them onto others. For example, someone who fears rejection may interpret neutral gestures as signs of abandonment. A person who doesn't feel worthy of love may attract partners who reinforce that belief. When we don't love ourselves, we create a cycle of self-sabotage in relationships, either by settling for less than we deserve or by pushing away those who could offer true love. But self-love doesn't mean becoming emotionally untouchable. It means, above all, knowing yourself and understanding what you truly want and need in a relationship. It means not entering relationships out of fear of loneliness, but out of a genuine desire to share life. It means not accepting emotional crumbs, but also not imposing unrealistic expectations on others. Healthy self-love teaches us to relate in a balanced way, with vulnerability but without dependence, with openness but without submission. One of the most important aspects of this balance is the distinction between need and choice. When someone lacks self-love, they feel they desperately need another person to feel complete. This kind of attachment suffocates and drains any relationship because it places excessive weight on the partner. In contrast, when we cultivate strong self-love, we choose to be with someone because we want to, not because we need to. This freedom creates a space where love can flourish without pressure or fear. Jung also teaches that the unconscious attracts what remains unresolved within us. In other words, if we don't make peace with ourselves, we will continue attracting relationships that reflect our internal conflicts. This explains why so many people repeat destructive relationship patterns. The mind tries to resolve, through others, what actually needs to be healed within. That's why healing your relationship with yourself is the first step toward building healthy connections. Self-love doesn't just improve our romantic relationships, it transforms all of our interactions. When we respect ourselves, we naturally command respect. When we value ourselves, we stop accepting less than we deserve. And when we are at peace with ourselves, we can offer others a love that is genuine, free from hidden insecurities and unrealistic demands. But here's a crucial detail. Self-love isn't built through positive affirmations alone. It requires practice, concrete actions, and a profound shift in how we treat ourselves. So, how can we apply this in our daily lives? Practicing self-love in daily life. Putting self-love into practice requires more than just repeating motivational phrases in front of a mirror. It's an active process involving daily decisions about how we treat ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we face challenges. Self-love is not a fixed state of constant confidence. It's an ongoing commitment to act in favor of our own well-being, even when we don't feel our best. Self-care goes beyond relaxing baths or moments of leisure. It includes choices that support our physical, emotional, and mental health. Getting enough sleep, eating well, moving our bodies, and maintaining a routine that respects our needs are all ways to practice self-love. But beyond taking care of our bodies, we must also care for our minds, learning to say no without guilt. Respecting our own boundaries and avoiding toxic environments are crucial steps in this process. Jung once said, "What we deny enslaves us, and what we accept transforms us." This means that denying our needs and emotions only makes us prisoners of them. When we ignore exhaustion, force ourselves to please others, or stay in situations that harm us, we engage in self-sabotage. Self-love, on the other hand, teaches us to listen to and honor what we feel. Many of our struggles with self-love come from deeply ingrained beliefs from childhood. If we grew up hearing that we weren't good enough or that we had to be perfect to be loved, those ideas take root in our unconscious and shape how we see ourselves. A crucial part of self-discovery is questioning these beliefs and replacing them with healthier thoughts. Jung warned about the dangers of living under the influence of the collective unconscious, which imposes rigid standards of how we should be. Questioning these expectations is an act of self-love. Ask yourself, where do the expectations I place on myself come from? Are they truly mine, or were they imposed by someone else? Am I criticizing myself for failing to meet a standard that doesn't even make sense for me? Reprogramming how we think about ourselves takes time, but it's possible. We can replace excessive self-criticism with a more compassionate inner voice, one that encourages rather than punishes. We can start seeing ourselves not as unfinished projects in need of fixing, but as complete human beings in continuous growth. The people around us directly influence how we feel about ourselves. If we're surrounded by those who disrespect, belittle, or invalidate our emotions, maintaining a healthy sense of self-worth becomes difficult. That's why one of the most powerful acts of self-love is consciously choosing the relationships we nurture. This means learning to distinguish between genuine connections and attachments based on emotional dependence. When we value ourselves, we seek relationships that add to our lives rather than just fill a void. We begin to recognize when someone isn't treating us as we deserve, and we develop the courage to walk away without fearing loneliness. And perhaps the most important point, when we love ourselves, we become capable of loving others without projecting our insecurities or expecting them to complete us. Love ceases to be a need and becomes a choice. But to solidify self-love, we must confront the fear of rejection and loneliness. So how can we face these challenges without compromising our authenticity? Overcoming the fear of rejection and loneliness. The fear of rejection and loneliness is one of the biggest obstacles to self-love. Many people avoid standing up for themselves, setting boundaries, or even getting to know themselves better because they fear losing the acceptance of others. But this fear reveals a fundamental truth. When we constantly seek external approval, we are placing our sense of worth in someone else's hands, and that makes us prisoners of insecurity. Jung teaches us that, often, we project our deepest fears onto others. The fear of rejection, for example, may actually reflect our own struggle to fully accept ourselves. If, deep down, we believe we are unworthy of love, any sign of disapproval from others will be interpreted as confirmation of that belief. But here's the truth. Rejection is a natural part of life. It is not proof of inadequacy, but rather an indication of incompatibility, of needs, interests, or life circumstances not aligning. We have all experienced both sides of rejection: friendships that faded, relationships that didn't work out, opportunities that never materialized. None of this makes us any less deserving of love and respect. Rejection only hurts deeply when we over-identify with it. When a door closes, we can see it as an irreparable loss or as redirection towards something better suited to our true selves. The key is to change the narrative. Instead of viewing rejection as proof of our insufficiency, we can see it as life's way of steering us away from what wasn't meant for us. The fear of loneliness, on the other hand, pushes us into superficial relationships and emotional dependency. But being alone is not the same as being lonely. Solitude can be a powerful opportunity for self-discovery, a time for reflection, where we reconnect with our desires, values, and purpose. Jung emphasized that the path of individuation requires moments of introspection. We can only become who we truly are when we silence external noise and turn inward. Many people avoid this journey because they fear what they might find in the silence. But it is in this space of solitude that we uncover our true essence. Cultivating a strong relationship with ourselves is one of the greatest signs of self-love. This means learning to enjoy our own company, developing personal interests, and finding fulfillment beyond external validation. A person with a rich and well-structured inner world does not fear solitude because they understand that their worth is not defined by being constantly surrounded by others. The fear of rejection and loneliness never completely disappears. But self-love teaches us to act despite it. Instead of holding back our thoughts out of fear of judgment, we learn to express ourselves authentically. Instead of staying in unhealthy relationships just to avoid being alone, we gain the courage to choose our connections wisely. In the end, loving yourself is an act of freedom. When we no longer need external validation to feel whole, we become truly free to love and be loved in a genuine way. But for self-love to be truly solid, it must be cultivated with consistency. So how can we strengthen this practice daily and turn it into a lifestyle? Making self-love a way of life. Cultivating self-love as a way of life requires more than occasional moments of self-care or sporadic reflections. It needs to be woven into every aspect of daily life, from how we talk to ourselves to the decisions we make. Self-love is not a final destination, but a series of daily choices that strengthen our relationship with ourselves. The way we speak to ourselves profoundly impacts our self-esteem. Too often, we repeat harsh inner narratives we would never say to another person: "You never do anything right. You're not good enough. You always mess things up." This kind of corrosive self-criticism prevents us from developing a healthy sense of self-worth. Jung teaches that we must integrate all parts of ourselves, the strong and the vulnerable, the courageous and the insecure. Instead of punishing ourselves for our flaws, we should treat ourselves with the same compassion we would offer a dear friend. Replacing destructive thoughts with a kinder inner dialogue is a powerful act of self-love. When you catch yourself engaging in harsh self-criticism, ask, "If I said this to someone I love, would it make them feel better or worse?" If the answer is worse, it's time to reframe your self-talk. Instead of saying, "I'm a failure," try, "I'm learning and growing every day." Small changes in how we treat ourselves make a huge difference over time. Every choice we make reflects how we see ourselves. When we accept less than we deserve, when we prioritize pleasing others at the expense of our well-being, we reinforce the belief that our worth is secondary. On the other hand, when we make decisions aligned with who we truly are, we strengthen our self-esteem. This could mean leaving a job that drains us, saying no to commitments that exhaust us, or simply prioritizing activities that genuinely bring us joy. Self-love manifests when we honor our needs, without fear of disapproval. Many people hesitate to do this because they fear appearing selfish. But there's a crucial difference between selfishness and self-love. Selfishness seeks only personal gain without regard for others, while self-love is the ability to care for yourself without neglecting anyone else. When we put ourselves first in a healthy way, we show the world that we deserve respect. Practical ways to cultivate self-love. Daily, keep a gratitude journal, writing down things you appreciate about yourself. Set realistic goals and celebrate small victories. Avoid destructive comparisons, reminding yourself that everyone has their own journey. Surround yourself with supportive people, distancing from those who constantly undermine your self-esteem. Create moments of connection with yourself, whether through meditation, reading, art, or any activity that nourishes your soul. Self-love grows through consistency. Small daily actions build a strong foundation until it becomes second nature. At the end of the day, no one can truly love you until you learn to love yourself first. When you treat yourself with respect and kindness, the world reflects that back to you. The love we seek outside can only flourish when it already exists within us. So, are you ready to embrace this journey? If this content resonated with you and helped you reflect on the power of self-love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here we dive into deep topics on psychology, self-discovery, and philosophy to help you live with more awareness and authenticity. Leave a like, share this with someone who needs to hear this message, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Your journey of transformation starts now. Let's go together.